I could go out with sweatpants and a t-shirt from H&M and feel just as confident as the guy next to me who's wearing a $10,000 suit.
What changes did you make to shift that mindset for your dream life from a person of having to being?
So I just understood.
Was Kendrick Lamar and Gary Vee also the same in person?
Oh, God. Kendrick, that story was insane, man. And I realized, oh my God, the man that she was talking to was Gary Vee. So like a psychopath, he's 2 car lengths in front of me, but there's no cars in front. I don't even think twice. I just lay on the horn and I get his attention. So he looks up at me. I'm in my car and I grab my head and I go.
How did you stop chasing like dopamine yourself? And when you did want it, what did you do?
That's literally what got me to stop drinking. Was I just did the math. I'm like, what's the actual hidden cost? When you do the hidden cost, not just on the singular action, but if you have some fun with it and you're like, well, how does this affect me over a week, over a month, over a year? It's like, whoa.
Welcome to the Minds Unleashed show with your host, Eric. Join him on the journey where we explore transformative ideas, confront challenges, and discover new perspectives. Together, let's elevate the mindset and transform your personal and business success. So whether you're seeking motivation, practical advice, or a fresh perspective, you've come to the right place. Join Eric on the Minds Unleashed show, and let's dive in together to empower your mind and unleash freedom.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Minds Unleashed show. I'm your host, Eric. As always, if you get value out of this podcast, please share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and leave us a 5-star review on Spotify and Apple. I truly appreciate it. All right, let's get into today's show. I'm so grateful to introduce you to today's guest, Bobby Hobert. Bobby is a lifestyle design coach for entrepreneurs and a podcast host himself. Welcome to the show, Bobby.
I'm happy to be here, brother. Let's have a great conversation today.
I'd love to start us off with taking you back to an interview you had a very long time ago. And you said, and I quote, "Ever since I was a kid, my mother and father always told me that no matter what you do, just make sure you love what you do. They never forced me to do one thing or another." And thinking about this advice that you received as a kid, I feel like it gave you so much confidence and so much resilience at such an early age. And so my question is, have you reflected on this advice being pivotal for your journey? And have you gone back to your parents and told them that you're doing what you truly love to do?
Oh, you just want to kick it off with a banger to drop into this conversation. It's funny. I don't know what podcast you found that, but I appreciate you doing the research. I find more often than not, that quote ends up coming up in a lot of podcasts when I'm on them because it was such a pivotal quote when I was younger, and it's so much a part of my story. Have I told them, though, the importance of it? Maybe I do need to follow up and make sure that they fully understand. I definitely have given them their flowers and letting them know how important it was and how pivotal it is. And every time I see them or talk to them, because I live in Texas, they're in Massachusetts, I do try to like express the gratitude of how much they've impacted me and how I wouldn't be who I am today. But what you said earlier is so true, is like the resilience, the confidence, having that support behind me when I was graduating college and I didn't want to get a full-time career. I knew in the back of my mind, like they were going to support me in anything that I wanted to do, which was so powerful because I went to college with kids that literally were getting jobs because their parents were forcing them. And when I called my parents and I said, "Hey, I'm not getting a job. I'm going to drive Uber full time and I'm going to start a podcast." They're like, 1, what's a podcast? 2, if that's what you want to do, be our guest. Just know that your student loans kick in 6 months and we're not going to support you in that. You need to pay for that for yourself. And I was like, yeah, I'll find a way. And ever since, there have been moments when they kind of hold their breath when I tell them I'm doing X, but they're like, if that's what you need to do, then you go do that. So yeah, some of the most important advice. And yeah, I'm curious what my life would have looked like if I didn't get that. And I think truly I heard it from my father more than my mom. And my dad did 30 plus years as a correctional officer working in the jail system in Massachusetts. And I think, he did what he needed to do to, keep the lights on and put food on the table for us. But I think there was always a part of him that wanted to do something different. And so I think he was passing that along to us, myself and my sister, because he never wanted us to be in a position that maybe he was in. So very, very important advice.
Wow. I see that a lot with parents today, where you see them sacrifice their own dreams in order to give that opportunity for their parents.
Yeah.
And do you think your dad has kind of explored the things he's maybe passionate about or the dreams that he has? Do you try to enable him to pursue that at all?
Yeah, he retired, I think 2 years ago now at this point. So he has a lot more time. And so he is a diehard Boston sports fan. So with the Celtics winning a couple weeks ago, he was locked in for that. But I have tried to stay on top of him, and even including my mom as they get older, and as my mom will retire in the next few years. Like, I think it's pivotal that the next phase of their life is doing something. Like, I don't think it's healthy to just sit around all day, and my dad, doesn't necessarily do that. But yeah, I've encouraged him. He plays golf here and there. He always keeping tab on Boston sports. He runs a lot of errands for my mom while she's working still currently. But I do try to put a strong emphasis on, like, hey, you're in your late 60s. You still got a good amount of time left. Well, how do you want to spend the next 25, 30 years? Because that's a whole nother career in whatever you want it to be. So yeah, I do encourage.
I almost see you being like his accountability partner.
100%.
Did you time block your fitness today? Did you time block, your meditation? I could see you saying those things to him.
I try, but I also don't want to overstep, because I know it can be a lot. And I have to remind myself that the way I view time is a skill set that I developed over the last 8 years. And I can't just expect them to understand and know it the way I do. So I try to be very gentle with it. But even as I said to you, he retired 2 years ago now. He has a whole day open. My mind immediately went inside, like, all right, how do we like design this day to be the most optimal day for you, Dad? So I try to be gentle with the topic.
I think that's important too, because it's so easy for us to kind of look at somebody else and think of all the possibilities, but then realize from their perspective that if you're doing that, you could almost do the complete opposite, which you truly don't want to do either.
Yeah. It's like you ever heard the quote, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink it. It's the same thing. Like,
oh yeah,
it's like putting the foot on the gas, putting on the brake of, like, pushing and encouraging someone to change or to do something. And then also being like, you have to, like, let it go. It has to be from a place of they want it for themselves.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen this in my own friends, right? Like, I always want to constantly help them out, give them advice. And I think I'm starting to have to take on that perspective of, like, be gentle, show them through action, which is like a mantra I see you kind of embody, which is show, don't tell. So I think I need to kind of take that on myself and be more intentional about that.
Yeah, I think it comes from a place for you, like, it's love. You want to help friends. You want to support them.
Yeah.
But the best thing that you can do is continue to build the life you want for yourself, and whatever that looks like, showing and documenting it along the way, and knowing that you are positively changing them by you just doing the thing. Right. And if there is a time when they come to you and say, Eric, I want your advice. Can I get your opinion on this? Great. Awesome. You're ready to give it. But also, if they're not ready for it, all good. I'm not gonna go out of my way and stick my nose into their business.
Yeah, that's a good place to be, especially for a lot of us. And I think another thing that I'm curious on that you kind of touched on is, what would your life kind of been like if your parents were unsupportive? But I'm also curious, like, when you told them, I want to drive for Uber and I want to start a podcast, like, do you think you would have had a lot of self-doubt if they were super hesitant and maybe pushed a lot of their anxious thoughts onto those ideas that you had?
Yeah, it would have taken even more courage and more belief in myself to do the thing if they didn't believe in me. The other important key factor in me having the confidence to even start a podcast was my best friend that I had grown up with. His name is Dylan Reese. He's a pop and R&B artist. And so long story short, I had seen the evolution of him as an artist from high school. We're driving around our town selling tickets and people are not saying very nice things about him, to then a decade later, he's touring around the US and he's making a living doing it. Right. So it's like, I also had that in my back pocket of like this playbook of understanding you have to start, you need to learn, you're going to have some setbacks, you're going to have some bumps. But as long as I stay consistent through it, I would figure it out. And I knew that with the podcast, just given I saw him do with music. So yeah, if the parents were against it, I think it would have been harder for me to fall through on it. I still would have done it. Even young 22-year young Bobby would have still just fall through on it because it was so clear in me that was like what I wanted and needed to do. So I definitely would have powered through on it.
Yeah. And I love how you mentioned kind of your best friend, Dylan Reese. And you said you were kind of in high school, riding around in the car with him, trying to sell tickets. Like, did you have those like conversations with him of like, why are you doing this? Like, what are you doing? And like, kind of like going through like maybe his decision-making process? Because there's so many people trying to be a, music artist and, the high school days with their SoundClouds. So
yeah. It was really interesting, man. Like Dylan grew up a few blocks over from me. Like one of my day one homies, we rode the school bus together every morning. And then eventually when I got a car, I was able to help him sell tickets because he didn't have his license at the time and never got it till this day. So he's a big Uber guy. But it was interesting for me to see firsthand, like he was someone that grew up playing a lot of basketball and he was trying to pursue it at the college level. Now, this was someone that was 5'6", coming out of Massachusetts. Like the odds were stacked against him, but he still was absolutely relentless. Ended up becoming top shooter in Western Massachusetts, went all state for Massachusetts. Like he had this fire in him. And so he replicated that into the music. And so I got to see everything. Like I'd be hanging out with him in the studio and he's making music. We'd go drive, sell tickets. At one point I was his quote unquote manager. I was then his quote unquote hype man. And I used quote unquote because we were just young and it wasn't that serious, but like we did sold out shows of 300 people and I was on stage with them. And I just learned so many important lessons working alongside him. And I just think the one thing that he had within him that I transferred to myself was just absolute relentlessness of this is what I want to do and I'm going to find a way. And not only did he find a way to get a college scholarship to play basketball, he then quit playing basketball in college to redirect all of his time and energy to the music. And a decade later, he's been living off full time. He's never had an actual job.
When I was doing my research for you, like you always had this mantra of like, keep going. And I was like curious where your relentless pursuit kind of was shown to you. And it was Dylan.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like when you were driving around with him, like what did you kind of like, what were some of your takeaways and lessons that you had from those moments?
We had the wildest dreams for him. Like I was so invested in him of just wanting to see him succeed and sell out these massive venues. And like, there were like these smaller venues and the bigger venues in Western Mass. And so like the biggest venue, I think maybe you could sell it out at 800 people. And it was like, all right, we're at the 200 person venue. Then we got to get to the 500 and then we got to get to the 8. And we never sold out the 800, but he did perform there for a few shows as an opener. So it was just that like passion, man, like I'm 16, 17. He's a year older than me. We're driving around, like we're meeting people up at our local mall to like sell them $8 tickets. I remember he wanted to do his first merch order and I had always been like a hustler and was working for my uncle and then had a job at our local grocery. I was always making money and saving it. And the first round, and I also found the manufacturer for the clothing line. And the first round was gonna be like $700 and he didn't have $700 to invest in it. And I was like, dude, I'll put up the money. Like, I don't need any interest on it. Just pay me back. And it got us our first round of merch and he paid me back pretty quickly. And I believed in him. And, there have been moment, maybe a year ago, I had the opportunity to actually invest in him and his business. And it was like, no questions asked. I believe in you. more than anyone. And I just believe in you as an individual. It doesn't matter what the talent is. It's who you are that I'm investing in. So yeah, if I close my eyes and I actually think back to those days, man, it was just, we're just young, but also just believing like this, the world is ours for the taking. And that's the way we approached it.
I love it too. Cause like, I feel like at that age, you have like this strong belief that you can do it. Right. 100%. Whereas like now, I'm going to be 30 this year. You're kind of like, the self-doubt, just hamster wheel, just goes spinning and spinning, whereas if you were 16, you're like, what is it? What do I have to do? Go get you some shirts. All right, let's go do it. Like, and you figure it out.
Think like kids, right? Kids 5, 6, they just explore. Their curiosity is running wild. They see a shiny object. They go running towards it. Like they just are exploring. And as we get older, that curiosity, that adventureness in us starts to disappear. And it's on us to create it, right? And so if I fast forward even now, I'm 30 years young and I have to pinch myself and kind of laugh like my life is play. My playground is like creating content and like going to men's run clubs here in Austin. Like it's just a different version, but now I'm older, right? So it's like, I think Dylan was lucky to find that curiosity so young. And then for me to get a glimpse at it, because if I didn't have that perspective and then at 22 or maybe, someone in their 30s, how much confidence it takes for one to just at 30 decide they're going to start the podcast, that they're going to do the thing that they've never done. Like that takes a lot.
I totally agree. And you saw what happens when you put in so much time and love into the thing that like just gives you so much energy.
Yeah.
And on top of that, like you chose to support your friend on his kind of crazy dream, right? And yeah. I think that more friends and family need to do that towards other people, right? Like, what's the quote where it's like, you can't tell big dreams to small-minded people, right? And so, if you tell your dreams to your parents and they just kind of shoot you down, like that just takes your confidence from 100 to 0 so fast.
Yeah. This is great because you're at the time of recording this, you have 7 episodes out. We think that this one won't come out until the 14th one. So we're speaking on future tense, but
yes.
What was the response like to your closest friends and family when you said, hey, I'm starting a podcast?
That's a great question because the only friends and family that have found out are the ones that have found out through my social media. I haven't actually gone out and told them yet.
Love that.
And I have asked close friends to give me their feedback or also watch it, right? But the other thing that I've also found interesting is obviously as a podcaster, you do batch your episodes as much as you can. And because there's a good amount of time between when we record and when we post, I'll actually sometimes sit down and go listen to the older episodes and I have a brand new, fresh perspective. And
absolutely.
It is wild to all the different thoughts or avenues or tangents that you think of after the fact versus, recording in the moment. And I find that to be really interesting.
Yeah. I've always steered away from replaying episodes. The only time I'll replay an episode of mine is, it's only been a few times where I've had repeat guests on the podcast, maybe a year, 2, 3 years later. So I want to go back, hear that first conversation and maybe pull some points. But even just listening to those, I'm like, whoa, I can hear it just in my inflection and the confidence and the things I'm talking about. I'm like, wow, I can literally bring myself back to that moment. So, but I honestly, I think you not telling anyone almost sets you up for more success because you're not getting any feedback. Well, why are you starting a podcast, Eric? Why are you, then now you're questioning yourself, well, wait, why am I starting a podcast, right? You need a lot of mental strength to be able to hear those opinions and not care and let them go. So yeah, I applaud you. I think that's a great way to approach it.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that because the self-doubt hamster wheel, like I've mentioned before, constantly spins. So I have to definitely quiet that voice. And it's interesting too, because it reminded me actually of one of the tweets that you put out. And it was actually back in 2018 when you were doing Uber. And you said, I can think of one moment in 2018 where I was driving on a Tuesday night in Santa Monica. I just dropped off somebody and I pulled over to the side of the road and I just fucking bawled my eyes out because I was like, why isn't this happening faster? Why am I not doing this creative stuff faster? Why is it that I'm still behind the wheel driving people? And I think I read that after spending hours kind of, hitting that same wall of like, you're looking at the analytics and you're just like, why isn't this happening faster? Or you then compare yourself to the great podcasters, which is definitely one of the worst things to do. I don't recommend that one. When you were going through those moments, like, how did you keep going? And like, did you ever have a thought where you're like, okay, I can only do this for 6 more months and then I got to figure out something?
Yeah. It's funny because even those moments, like I had that moment happen back in end of March, end of April, early May for me. And I was not going to quit, but a lot of self-doubt like was ripping in my mind. I don't want to keep bringing up Dylan, but I think it like so many parallels from just seeing that of like trusting the process and knowing that not every podcast is going to be great. Not every day I'm going to love it. The results aren't going to necessarily be maybe what I want them to be, but as long as I stay focused on the process rather than the results, I'm going to get one step closer to where I want and need to be. So those moments would come. And funny enough, that the time when I actually was slowing down my first podcast, Purpose in the Youth, was the fall of 2019. I had recorded the last 3 episodes, and then I was going to announce like after this episode, I'm going on a hiatus. And timing, man. You want to believe in the God, you want to believe in the universe, whatever. As I'm 2 weeks out from slowing down the show, I literally get a full-time offer to work at Liquid IV, which is then the next thing I did for the next 4 years. So that was the only time when I was actually burnt out from doing the show and not being able to figure out how to grow it and monetize it, that I was like, I need to like give this some space. I need to let it breathe. I need to get out of this weekly cadence. It's taking, minimum 10 hours just for one episode, from reaching out, booking it, researching it, producing it, editing it. I'm like, this is a 10-hour investment every week. What would it look like to have an extra 10 hours back? Could I figure out the next thing? Am I not seeing it clearly? So yeah, other than that moment when I actually was literally planning to stop, it happened for a reason, because then I got the job. And ever since, I've just gone through my own like different seasons. Podcasts, I got back into it at one point and then took about an 18-month break because TikTok and my Instagrams were doing really well. So I was like, let me just go all in on that. So you go through seasons, and every person's journey is different. But I really do believe if you fully commit to the process and trust it and push yourself to get 1% better every day, you're inevitably going to get better with time, which is going to get you to a place you want to be.
Yeah, that's so important too, because when I was in that moment, I was texting my best friend and he said exactly that. He's like, dude, you got to love the journey. You got to love the process, right? It's not about an extra couple hundred views. It's about like, do you love what you're doing? And then are you also like learning and becoming a better person, as you're going through it? And taking that step back is key. It's pivotal because it's so easy to get caught up in that hamster wheel, and to like you said, the weekly cadence, like if it feels like an endless loop. And I've reflected so much that it's, I feel like I do need that time and space to just kind of like just be present in the moment. And I, for sure need to do a better job of that.
Yeah. If I could, I'm not saying this is advice, but if I'm sitting across from Bobby at episode 7, what I would want to, from the future version Bobby, what I would say to him is, don't beat yourself up if you miss an episode. I went like 40 weeks straight and then I missed one, and I was like heartbroken because I felt like every episode was just another opportunity for me to grow. So if I'm not putting out an episode, that means I'm not growing. But I would just say, like, stay committed to a cadence that works for you, and don't beat yourself up if you need to take a week break or a 2-week hiatus. Like, if you're in it for the long term, you have nothing but years of time to produce these podcasts and go at a pace that's going to be sustainable enough for you that you can stay consistent for 10 years and not burn out after 10 weeks. And I think too, you probably already seeing it is just, I think what kept me so motivated podcasting, even when I wanted to give up, was every week I was having an in-depth conversation with someone that I was motivated, inspired by, or just wanted to get to know. And that's what kept me fueled, because I was just planting seeds with a lot of great people. And what I didn't know at the time is a lot of those conversations turned into lifelong friendships, turned into career opportunities, turned into roommates. Like if I connect all of the dots back, it all goes back to the podcast from where I'm at presently in my life.
It totally resonates to be sustainable, because that is so key. And I don't think people realize how much time it takes behind the scenes to produce an episode. Like you mentioned 10 hours, and I think I'm probably 15 to 20 hours from, guest booking.
You'll condense it as you're 7 episodes in. You check back in episode 20, you're like, Bobby, I got this down to 8 hours. I'm so efficient.
I would say it's mostly research though, right? Like, I think that's been my kind of unique perspective that I'm trying to utilize. I think growing up, I had to be more critical of myself. So I think that impression comes out into my work where it's like, okay, how do I make this better? How do I make this better? It's like that perfectionist in me. And, I'm trying to also realize that, like you said, right? How can I do this for 10 years, not 10 weeks? So I'm also trying to take a step back, take a breath, relax, and just realize that like you're doing the best you can given this current moment. Right. Yes. And I think if you take that perspective on with all the information you have that's out there, if you just take that perspective and apply it to the current moment, that just kind of like relieves so much like kind of, pent up stress and anxiety thoughts that could be, just plaguing you.
Where's the perfectionism come from for you?
It came from not receiving love from certain parents, and anything you did was never enough. It was like, okay, great. You did this. What about the next step? You did this. What about the next thing? You did this. What about the next thing? Right. Or, and so something I've had to kind of work through myself, something I'm still currently working on. Right. So I think the biggest thing for me is just to keep going. Right. And it sounds kind of silly to say, but like, I can easily get myself lost in, the what ifs or this and that, but, come back to kind of being centered and just focusing on the guest, because I just love to do like research and learn about somebody. Like that's what keeps you going, which is what you mentioned keeps you going. Like just having that conversation gives you energy. And, are there things that have to happen behind the scenes that might take away my energy? For sure. But that can't be a reason that I stop doing something that I truly love doing so far.
2 thoughts. One is you mentioned keep going twice in just this rift right here. So I want to point out, but literally the first tattoo I ever got, can't really see it. It says keep going. So that's the first tattoo.
You got the 1% too.
Yeah, I got the 1% there too. But the keep going was the first tattoo I ever got right when I left driving Uber and then went and worked at Liquid IV full time. But I genuinely mean this. You are enough. And the process of you doing is enough. So I would encourage you as you continue to build this, be that, I don't want to say role model or mentor, but be that reflection that you want within yourself, because you just doing is enough. We don't need to see 100 plays, 100,000. We don't need to see anything. Process. As long as you're focused on the process rather than the result, you're doing enough. And here's what happens. As you, just like I joked, it takes you 15 to 20 hours. Well, 10 weeks later, it's going to be 8 hours. As you continue to hone in on the skill sets, you're going to be more effective and more efficient, which is then going to create more time for you to make more social media posts, to then start incorporating, LinkedIn posts or whatever it looks like for you. So all that to say, just give yourself grace and knowing that this is a huge endeavor you're going on, but you are enough and you're doing enough just in the act of actually doing, because most people won't get off their ass and do, and you're doing it right now.
That's so true. And I really appreciate that comment. Thank you so much. The one thing that you did mention, I want to kind of take a step back to what we talked about previously. And you talked about kind of dabbling in all these different creative endeavors. And you mentioned you do a run club. I know you do a run club with Danny.
Yes. Danny boy.
And I know that Danny Miranda is currently going through this journey of kind of showing you his highs and lows on a daily basis. And being somebody that is around him, not from an online social media presence, like, can you kind of tell me what your mindset is going into supporting him as a friend, and what advice you would have for somebody in your shoes that you see, a friend struggling in that same?
I think the context is important first, which is I met Danny a few years ago. We did a podcast. I was on his show. Then he was on my show. And I met him for the first time in person April of last year, when we figured out that we were moving to Austin, my fiance and I was really excited because I was like, Danny's there and I get to spend more time with him. And I knew a few other people. Pretty quickly after I moved out here, me and him started doing a weekly call together for an hour where we would just riff on podcasts, life, etc. So fast forward a few months, he's speaking on it. He's spoken on it publicly, so I can at least say this part. He was going through a breakup, and we still had this weekly call time scheduled. So every week, I would still see him, and I saw such a transformation in just 8 weeks. And there were a couple of weeks where we would skip for one reason or another. But I think the most important thing in those moments when someone's going through something is to just listen and to ask questions. Either questions that are going to change their perspective, questions for them to go deeper. You're kind of just guiding them on this path to talk out loud the thoughts that are running in their mind on loop every day, all day. So I felt really grateful to be able to be there to support him through it. And it just reminded me how important it is to just have someone, right? Like, it's a huge epidemic with the amount of people that feel lonely, and there's studies showing that we feel more lonely now than we did 40 years ago. It's like, how is that possible when you have these cell phones and you have the internet? But I think it's that exact reason is people can stay confined to their homes and scroll all day, but they are missing that human connection. So I would just say, if you know someone that is in a tough spot, reach out to them. Create space and time for them, and either let them just speak or ask them questions that will hopefully try to dig them out of where they're at.
I think that's good advice. The other thing I heard from a prior episode from a therapist, she said that, if they don't want to be asked, they feel like they're maybe always like answering these questions to maybe like 10 other people. And so that can be exhausting. And the other thing that I heard that you could do is just like, what if you just like showed up to where they're at and like make dinner with them or watch a movie or go do like an activity? And I thought that was such great advice I've never heard before. And I was like, the point isn't to ask them questions during those activities. The point is that you're just there with them.
Yeah.
And whatever conversation happens. But I was like, oh, wow. Because, sometimes when you're, just so lonely, or maybe you haven't left your house for that day, like just seeing somebody, right, getting that human connection can kind of light your day up, or, completely take your mind out of kind of that dark hole that you're in.
Yeah, that's honestly so true. And even when I think back on those like first 2 months, we would go on walks and there would be long pauses where neither of us were talking, and it just was both understood. Like, we're just present. We're enjoying each other's company. We're enjoying the walk, and nothing needs to be said. And sometimes, like, even when I said like ask questions, it might not even, there were times when it was on the subject, and there were times where we were just riffing on completely different things. So yeah, that's a great call out.
The conversation that I heard, when you and Danny were at the park and you guys recorded that one, was how when you were going through a tough time, your phone background was actually a photo of you as a kid. And I've found that to be really inspiring because through the own personal development work I've done, I've heard a lot about this like inner child healing. And it really reminded me of that. Especially the phrase of like, if you were to see your 5, 6, 7-year-old self, like with the current thoughts going through your head or how negative you are, would you tell that to that, 6-year-old kid of yourself? And the obvious answer should be no. And I'm like, fuck, dude, if I was telling that kid the thoughts I have today, shit.
Yeah.
That's all I can say.
Yeah. Yeah. That was, I don't even remember how that happened or why. I mean, the context of why it was, my partner and I, now fiance, were rebuilding a relationship after we had like a 2-month break. I don't remember if it was the therapist I was working with suggested it or where it came from, but essentially, I made my background an image of me that I was probably 1st or 2nd grade. So maybe somewhere in that ballpark. I don't know what age that would be. And for me, it just served as like this daily reminder of like, this is who I am. I'm like, I was just a little boy X amount of years ago, and now I'm this bigger human being, but like, I'm still such a kid at heart. And I think it was just that frame of reference for me of like, this is where you were. This is who you were. Like, so I had it as my background for maybe 6 months, 8 months, maybe a little bit longer. And, there's something about it. Maybe it was Lewis Howes, actually, School Greatest podcast. I think that's where I got inspired by, because he had talked about it publicly a lot, having his phone background, an image of him. And it served its purpose right now. It's different. It just says, nobody cares, work harder. But having that background as the younger Bobby it served a purpose in my life.
I love how you mentioned the School of Greatness, because I know that Lewis is kind of your podcast, inspiration that you've talked about. And it's funny because Danny Miranda is actually my podcast inspiration.
Oh, that's really cool.
So I'm actually curious, and it could be more than just Danny. So like, what have you learned from him and also other people that you see them online, right? They might have a large following or a small following. What have you learned about these individuals that you don't see online, that you see actually being their friend, like in person?
I think, and it's just the type of people that I'm attracted to spend more time with, which is everything that you see and hear from him online is the same thing you're going to see and hear from him offline. Like, the greatest compliment I can ever get as a creator is something along the lines of like, oh, dude, you're like the exact person that I see on social media. Like, everything about you is the same. And that to me is like the greatest compliment, because it's like, yes, I'm authentically speaking through and speak like true to who I am at my core. And that's what you're feeling. Great. So similarly, like, if we're speaking on Danny specifically, he is that same person off camera. Like, he truly just wants to help people. He loves community building. He prioritizes his fitness. I think honestly, him going through the breakup, it was such a moment where finally he was receiving love, right? And I think he gets love. Don't get me wrong. He gets love from creating podcasts and, his coaching clients and et cetera. But I think I said that to him on the conversation at the park, which was like, I think this is a moment when people like myself get to step up and give to you for how much you give to us. But I've had the pleasure to meet Lewis, and he's exactly the same person on camera as he is off. Like, I went to his office to record a video to help promote his book almost 2 years ago now. Oh, or maybe it was a year ago. It was a year ago. And we sit down and shoot some of the clips, and all of a sudden I'm in the middle of an interview being interviewed, and he's like coaching me and asking me questions. And I'm like, wait a second. We were just supposed to sit down on this couch for a minute, and now 30 minutes goes by and I'm like in a full coaching session with him. So a lot of these people that you see online, that persona that you see, like if they have a lot of followers, it's really who they are. My fiance made a good point. I never thought of acting like this, but she made the point of, obviously you can be a great actor and not be, a serial killer in the movies, but like there are certain actors where like that's exactly who they are off screen, and that's why they fit that so well on screen. So yeah, all to say, Danny's the same person online as you see offline.
I think that is, honestly the greatest compliment you can receive. And that's, I think, why you see podcasts as a medium rising so much, because you don't get the 60-second reel of, Bobby, I know you love to put out like all your list videos, and all that good content, right? But at the same time, it's like when you talk to Bobby, you realize that he's like, that's who he is. And I think hearing that as a compliment has to be the best. And so now I'm curious, like, was Kendrick Lamar and Gary Vee also the same in person?
Oh, God. Amanda's research. Let's start with Kendrick, because you mentioned him first. Kendrick, that story was insane, man. I'm so happy that I didn't ask for a photo or video, but at the same time, I wish it was documented. But he was extremely humble. I was probably so caught off guard that I think he was literally playing his album, because he was running with his phone. The music was coming out of his phone. He wasn't wearing headphones. It was coming out of his phone. And I could have literally been so out of my, unaware that like he was playing his new album, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, he was incredibly kind. I think the context was like, it was 6 months into the pandemic. It's Manhattan Beach, California. It's on a Saturday afternoon. There's literally nobody. This is a bike path that runs along the entire LA. It's 20 miles long. Where we are at that moment of me running into him, there's nobody. If we went there right now, I mean, we're talking like bikers, rollerbladers, babies, people walking, like a lot. So the fact that it was just me and him was insane. And I literally flipped a Yui to keep running with him. And I ran with him for maybe like 3 or 5 minutes. It felt like eternity, but maybe it was like 3 minutes. And then I literally said to him out loud, I was like, you know what? I appreciate you letting me run with you, but I also want to respect your space and, appreciate your music. And that was it. And he said, hopefully I'll see you out here next time. And I never did, which is unfortunate. But Gary Vee, there's been 2 or 3 moments that I met him. My favorite moment is I was funny enough, I was driving. It was when I was still driving Uber full time and I was in LA, and this woman that I was driving was from Australia, and we were talking about Gary Vee. She had moved to LA. She was pursuing acting, and we were talking about how great his content is. Pull over to the side road. I let her out. She gets out. I'm on Sunset Boulevard. It's 5 p.m. on a Friday. It's popping. And I kind of glance down, I'm looking at my phone, and I look up and I see the back of this man, but I see her, and I'm like, is she good? Like, is she good? I was like, it doesn't look like this guy's trying to hurt her, but like, I knew she wasn't meeting up with anyone. And I put my head back down, and I think I could see she was walking away. A couple seconds later, I pick it up again, and I realize, oh my God, the man that she was talking to was Gary Vee. So like a psychopath, he's 2 car lengths in front of me, but there's no cars in front. And he's on the phone, and I don't even think twice. I just lay on the horn and I get his attention. So he looks up at me. I'm in my car, and I grab my head and I go, he can't hear me, but he can read my lips. I go, holy fuck. So he knows. And so I get out of the car, I run over real quick, and he was on the phone. I was like, big fan, blah, blah, blah. I was like, can I get a quick picture? Did a selfie. And I was a clever man, because I got in my car and I posted that photo, and I said, and mind you, Gary Vee didn't say more than like, nice to meet you, have a good day. I put the caption as, just ran into my boy Gary Vee. He said if he gets tagged 100 times, he'll do a podcast with me. I post that to my Instagram. I got 100 tags in probably 3 minutes. And so I was like, I need to keep the momentum going, because if people see there's already 100 tags, maybe they won't tag anymore. So I went in and I edited the caption. And I put 1,000. And now the comments just kept rolling. And eventually I kept boosting. I went from 1,000. I put it to 2,000, 2,003. I got up to 5,000 tags. And unfortunately, never heard from him, never heard from anyone on his team, but I capitalized on it. And side note, you'll appreciate this. What was really cool about that moment was I posted the photo. This is February of 2019, a few years in on the pod at this point. And I'll never forget. So I post that photo. I go drive a few rides. I pull over, I check. Post is blowing up. But the coolest thing that I saw was so many of the guests that I had met over the last 3 years on the pod, some of which were founders of successful companies, had big social media followings. They were reposting that photo to their story and tagging me and shouting out to their audience, help my boy Bob A out, tag Gary Vee in this post. And it was like such an amazing moment to see like all of these relationships that I was building. They were there for me to help me in a moment. They didn't realize it was actually, the pod wasn't going to happen if I got 100, but they were there to like help support me, which I thought was really cool.
I think it's funny too that you mentioned like, it sounds like in these split-second decisions, like you don't think twice about just like going after some of these people. Whereas for me, like I'm a huge sports fan, right? And I've seen some athletes, because I'm actually pretty good at like facial recognition in person. Like once I see like your face as a picture or online, I, am aware of like kind of who you are. I can spot you pretty well, like out in public. And so I've definitely spotted plenty of sports players and athletes. And I so want to just go up to them and be like, hey man, like, I love what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. Just like, kind of like what you are. But then I'm also like, maybe they don't like want that. And maybe they also are like, they want to just kind of be in public and not be bombarded. So I have that like battle so much in my head of like, do I do it? Do I not do it?
I think you got to lean into it. And I think it's all, I'm so happy you mentioned this because you're absolutely right. Like when I see an opportunity like that, I don't hesitate. Like I will go out of my way, but the key is paying attention to like the moment, right? So like, let's use the Kendrick moment, for example. He's running, I'm running. We're going opposite directions. So I flip a Yui and I start running with him and I'm talking to him. Gary Vee was on the side of the road. That was kind of a little crazy, but he was on the phone. I didn't care. I was a big fanboy then. But I think it's all about the way you approach and the way you communicate. And are you asking for anything? There are moments where like that, let's just say that an athlete comes by and I know who it is. I would like, it's all about the way you deliver it and like not making a scene. It's just like, Eric, hey, real quick, just want to say, huge fan. Been following you for a few years. And I just really respect what you do. And I'm a big fan of you. And I just want to say, thank you for doing you. Something short, simple, straight to the point. They appreciate. It's frictionless. It's not this like, oh my God, Eric. Now they're really stopped. Like you can say something like that so quickly that they don't really miss a beat and they can keep moving. You're not asking for the photo. You're not asking for video. You're not pitching them. And I think it's just a really good practice to do. So I would encourage you, like, next time that happens, like, lean into that discomfort, be very subtle about it. And you don't know what could come from that. Next thing you know, they might be like, Eric, what do you do? Oh, I'm running this podcast. Oh, and word, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. We should, would you want me to have me on the show? Like, yeah, I absolutely would, right? Like, you don't know. Yeah. So I would encourage you the next time that comes up, absolutely do that.
And the key point there is the delivery, right? And the delivery is key combined with kind of like be short, sweet, and appreciative. And like you said, when you kind of get into that asking for things and they kind of get taken back where, maybe at the end, if they reciprocate well, you could be like, yes. Oh, could we get a photo? Otherwise, yeah, I think keep going. And, maybe, I'll try to take you up on that offer. They'll build up some self-confidence.
Yeah. You just don't know. Like I'll give you, I can't think of an example for myself, but I can think of one for my buddy. Are you familiar with the artist Mike? He used to be known as Mike Stud, is now just Mike. You ever heard of him?
No, I've not.
Yeah. Long story short, one of my buddies ran into him at the airport 2 years ago. And maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Anyway, they were on the same flight. He's sitting there casually. No one really knows that it's him. So he goes up to him and just has like a quick 3-5 minute conversation as they're boarding. All good. Fast forward a year and a half, 2 years later, the guy's on Instagram Live pulling people in. He pulls him in and Mike's like, do I know you from somewhere? You look really, really familiar. And he's like, yeah, I was on that flight with you from Boston. And he was like, oh, dude, I remember that. We talked about this, that. And it was just that connection that like already just built their relationship even deeper. So I can't promise you how you speaking up and saying something is going to turn into some big old thing, but like I think you'll appreciate that feeling of like being able to acknowledge and share your thoughts to someone about who they are and how they've impacted you. And yeah, I would encourage you to do it.
I also encourage people listening to take on that challenge as well,
sure.
right? It's so easy to see somebody and, even when I see like, it could be like people in the military wearing like their uniform and flying. Like, I think I was flying back to see my family, and I asked myself, I was like, I wonder if the servicemen and women get like complimented and then like, or thank you for your service, something along that nature. And I'm like, do you think they get tired of like maybe constantly being bombarded by all that? Or maybe people on the other side are like pushing their thoughts and feelings onto that. And I'm like, no, maybe I, should go up to them and like just say thank you, like thank you for that. And I think that's such a genuine way to show how you're feeling, but also like you're practice that relationship building. And like you said, you never know what might happen.
Yeah, I've done that. It doesn't happen every time, but like I have tried to express that. Like if I'm getting on a flight or something where it's a very just like quick, like I appreciate your service. Like I can't imagine someone's like, I'm sick of being told thank you, So I would do it. I would keep doing it if it feels right.
The other thing I want to get into, you asked a great question on something you did recently. You hosted a dinner with a bunch of guys, and so I'm curious. You asked everybody that was coming, what lesson and story was like what's the hardest lesson you learned, and what's the story behind it? So my question for you is, which lesson and story resonated the most with you, and why?
Ooh, that's a juicy question. I think they were all incredible lessons. I think one that just immediately came to my heart, so I'll use that as one. But first off, not one is better than the other. They're all very unique and different. I really appreciated. I just got to know this guy out here probably about 3 months ago, and we've connected a few times, one-on-one or in small group settings. And I was happy he was able to make the dinner. But he shared how there was like a 4-year span where he moved cross countries he would go from the West Coast, got a job in tech, made great money for a year, then went to the East Coast, did that for a year, then came back to the West Coast, then back to the East Coast. He did that 4 times in 4 years, expecting a different and this was like working full time, drinking a lot, unhappy, unfulfilled, and kept rationalizing it's the city or it's the job. And so it was 4 times of doing this, and then finally telling himself like, no, you need to look in the mirror. It's something to do with you. And that like completely set him on a new path. And he's doing a lot of great work now, present day. And weirdly, I just had a call with him right before we got on here. So that's just weird timing. So the lesson for me, and I don't remember what his lesson was, but the lesson for me was every transformation story is different. It's unique. It's one of a kind. Some happen overnight. Some take years. But no matter what, there's a transformation that happens. And I think hearing those stories are so incredibly inspiring. It doesn't need transformation from like hating my life to loving my life. It could be like even the transformation I've gone, cutting out alcohol. Like I was already loving my life, and then I cut out alcohol and I started to love my life even more because I had more time, energy, and money. So that to me was the biggest takeaway, was just how every story is different when it comes to transformation. And I'm inspired by hearing anyone's and everyone's.
I love how he still committed to switching cities every year. And I say that because some people are afraid to leave the state that they reside in. I know you probably had a lot of, questioning or thoughts like, why am I leaving Los Angeles? Right. I know that it was a place you loved. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's something that you got to give him credit for, right? He's like, moving is expensive, 1, and 2, to get another job and, try to make new friends. Like that's a lot. I definitely give him a lot of credit for that. But interesting how, the city and the job were to kind of be the fault but internally, it's yourself. And I say that in satire because I always keep seeing the things on TikTok or Instagram where it's like, if you move out of your hometown, you'll be happier. And changing your physical environment can be a catalyst, but it's not always, it's not the catalyst if you are also not going to change. If you're going to bring that same energy and that same mindset to the new place, that's what you're going to be and that's what you're going to become.
So true, man. I don't think you need to, let's make this clear. You don't need to move out of your hometown to be successful, to create the life you want to live for yourself. But there is something to be said about, I'm a big believer that if I choose right now in this moment, Eric, I want to change something about my life, I can and I will do it. But there is even more emotional change that happens when you do completely change environments. Even moving homes, new apartments, that's a complete reset. To move it to a different city, new state, maybe even a new country. I haven't done that, but that is just a complete reset. And I can even speak on it just from even making the move from LA to Austin. The reality I've created here is so aligned with who I am at my core, because I spent 6 years out in LA. There was 3 different versions of me. There was the one that was driving Uber, recording the podcast. And there was the version that was working full-time at Liquid IV while partying his ass off. Then there was the version of me working at Liquid IV, but getting his shit together. And that attracted all different types of friends during those different phases. And then I moved here and it's 2 years plus without alcohol, really dialed in on fitness and well-being, now engaged, living the suburb life, right? It created a whole new reality for me. So I think moving can be pivotal depending on what you're trying to call into your life. And I met someone out here in Austin that literally moved here because he was living in Philly and he just could not strip away the old version of him. Nothing, he had changed, but his circle of people wasn't changing. And they had different beliefs, different values. And he just was you know what? I need to change cities to really force myself to meet and find new people. And I think it's worked out really well for him.
I've actually moved from my hometown to another place. And I think it's been amazing, but I'm thinking of I don't know if I would have done it if I didn't see my best friend do it. Right. And then also having family down here, because my rule was pretty similar to yours. It has to be somewhere warm, right? I'm tired of snow and all that nonsense. So there's not many kind of states that I had in mind. But it is interesting, right? Of you can only do so much in the place that you kind of grew up. Even just seeing the same gas station, you kind of get that, that feeling, right? And then you go to somewhere completely new, right? It does kind of feel like a reset. But the thing that I'm curious on is when you do move somewhere new, you do have to find a new circle of friends, maybe activities, communities, groups. So what did you do to find those in a new city? And also, what would you recommend to somebody that's not as extroverted as you?
So I was very fortunate moving. It was a very calculated decision to go from LA to Austin because both my partner and I knew Austin has a lot of the things that we loved about LA. Big wellness community, big creator community, outdoor community, entrepreneurship community. So it was a lot of things that we already were interested in out there existed here. And so I was very fortunate, once again, going back to Danny. I knew Danny. I knew he had just started to run a club. I had a few other friends that I knew that were based out here. And ultimately, going to Danny's run club was and has been my running joke of it's my men's dating pool. It's where I met a lot of great men. And it takes effort and consistency, right? So from September of last year till March, April, I'll speak on just my experience. I started to meet a lot of great people, but it just didn't feel like a home just yet. And then from April till present day, I and we really invested into building bigger community. And now it's made it feel like a home, getting invited to, this dinner party or getting invited to go do this thing or myself creating things for these people. So One is I think it takes time. Two, I think you need to put yourself into those positions. Like I've gone to events where there's 80 people. I don't know anyone going into it. And I just like kind of just flow with the room and try to meet people. So if I'm someone that is moving to a new city, I would say look for events, experiences, activities that you're interested in and go to them, because it's going to attract other people that like those things, which means they're probably going to vibe with you. I would make it a commitment, like weekly. I'd try to do at least one, maybe two community things a week. I would not be afraid to be the icebreaker. Like go up to people, ask them a question. Like everyone in the room is probably feeling the exact same way. Like just take that initiative step and go say hello. And I think it's the follow-up is where a community is really built. So you can go to all these events and experiences, but there's no follow-ups with some of the people you meet. You're playing a numbers game. So, Danny's Run Club, great example. I go, there's 20 guys, maybe one day, maybe I don't know. At least when I first started going, I didn't know all of them. So I'd be in a run with the group, start talking to one guy, get into a really good conversation, get his number, hit him up. Hey, let's grab coffee next week. Now I get coffee with him. It's just me and him for an hour. Great. Got to know him deeper. That's a person that now I feel like is in my ecosystem. And I would try to do that. Like go to these events and experiences where there's a lot of people, try to have 2, 3, maybe 4 solid conversations, and then try to have 1, maybe 2 follow-ups and explore and see if that friendship becomes something bigger.
That's important too, especially take advantage of like your hobbies and interests, right? Like for you, it's running. For me, I was laid off for 6 months and it was pickleball, right?
There you go.
I'm hanging out with, all the people playing pickleball, but that's what, and you kind of use like that hobby or interest as that breaking the ice kind of way. And even if it's playing board games or knitting or, the activities are relevant, but I think just that act of showing up for yourself and going out there and doing it. And, like you said, you never know what might actually happen from, who some of these people are, what you might learn, who they might know. So it's definitely kind of a new perspective I'm kind of taking away from this conversation, which is like, maybe you just gotta, don't think about it and just kind of do it.
Yes.
Don't get kind of trapped in your own head.
Be unattached to the results of like, you need to go find your next best friend and just go and just do the thing and have fun. And, if it's uncomfortable, that's a good thing because it's supposed to be. Like, did I enjoy going to that 80-person event and I didn't know a single person going in? I mean, I love a challenge, but it's not like I'm fired up. Like I would much prefer the 8-guy dinner where I know each of them and we're dropping into like a very intentional conversation where the 80-person is like, I'm just kind of flowing with the room and seeing like the types of people that are there. But ultimately it's our responsibility if we're feeling like we're lacking in community to go build it. If we feel like we're lacking with our fitness results to get more disciplined, if we're lacking with our business, being more mindful of how we're working, or are we focused or are we distracted? So, it just takes time.
I want to kind of now take you back to your time at Bentley University, at your time at your first internship. And you spoke how this idea for the dream was suits, Rolex watches, fancy cars. And I've been reading a book, which you probably know what it is, The Map of Consciousness. Yeah. And it's a book about who you are from a having and then who you are from a being, right? So having the suit, having the Rolex, having the fancy car, having the big house, having the white picket fence. And I think people, when they're growing up, you're in college and you have that internship, you have that perspective, right? Because that's how you've defined success. But this book has forced me to shift my perspective and mindset on like, no, it's really about who you are and are you trusting? Are you compassionate? Are you intentional? Are you self-aware? And so I'm curious, what changes did you make to shift that mindset for your dream life from a person of having to being?
I think one thing that really started to kind of change for me, I think it came out in 2016, was a documentary called The Minimalists. And it was a documentary about how these guys who were corporate America executives making a lot of money, had everything you could ever dream of, but were miserable, to then transforming and into a person where they had less than all of that. They just didn't have the car anymore. They had a very minimal apartment and they were happier. So I think that planted the seed in me of like, wait a second, could having less actually make me happier? And it also really inspired me because it was like, if I tell myself that I need a Ferrari to be happy, I'm banking on that Ferrari. And so what am I going to be miserable up until I get the Ferrari? But also, by the way, once I have the Ferrari for 6 months, I'm going to be sick of it and want the next car. So I just understood, whether it was just reading books, reflecting on it, or even thinking about it from like a simple like childhood, right? Like, oh, I want those new pairs of shoes. And then I get them. And then 2 months later, I'm like, I need the new pair, right? I knew it was just, I would be chasing dopamine constantly. So I have always kind of just stripped away that attachment that I need things to feel some type of way. Don't get me wrong. As my business grows and my financial success grows, I'm going to enjoy the things that are a byproduct of it, but I don't need them. It's going to be from a place of me choosing rather than me needing or me trying to impress others. And so with that being said, like, yeah, I find so much more joy, happiness, success, freedom from who I am, where I am, for what I have, because none of this matters. None of this actually is the value of who I am. Like I always used to joke, like I could go out with sweatpants and a t-shirt from H&M and feel just as confident as the guy next to me who's wearing a $10,000 suit, because I don't need the flashy things to feel good about myself.
I love that you mentioned that those like minimalist videos, because I definitely remember my time watching those videos. And you're kind of like, I mean, I got into like the people that would kind of like live in their van, right? Mm-hmm. And they're out in like, you know, Montana or something. And you're like, wait, they look a lot happier than the dude in New York City that's got, you know, $1 million condo. And so I find that fascinating because it's like you're just kind of going back to basics and much simpler things. And I try to tell myself that sometimes too.
Yeah. And here's the thing. It creates more peace when you keep things simple. Like I think about how much time and chaos people spend going shopping every weekend. I don't do any of that. Like if I need something, I'm Amazoning it or doing it online. I don't want to deal with the madness of shopping. So I would really encourage the Minimalist documentary. It came out in 2016. Then they came out with the second one, I think in 2020, maybe 2021. And then I would really encourage Matt Diavella, YouTube creator. He doesn't make as much content anymore on minimalism as much, but if you scroll back to like 2018, 2019, 2020, that content is really what put him on the map.
You talked about kind of stop chasing dopamine. So how did you stop chasing like dopamine yourself? And when you did want it, what did you do? Because fuck, dude, I find myself like, oh, I want to sit on my phone and rot on the couch, but you know, I can't do that 6 nights a week.
Yeah, the key is swapping the dopamine. So that's what I did, right? So instead of watching porn, I'll meditate. Instead of eating a bag of terrible food, I will eat something that's healthy and makes me feel good. Instead of drinking alcohol, I will go for a run. So I just have found other alternatives that give me just the same dopamine. And I've also just completely changed my like perspective on the toxic dopamine. Is like, this doesn't mean just choosing in this moment, but what else is this truly costing? What are the hidden costs? The money, the time, the energy. When I start doing that math, it just makes it so much easier for me to let go of it. So, you know, there's pockets of time when I will allow myself to scroll. It doesn't happen nearly like it used to. I'm very intentional with my phone, but I'll rationalize I need to scroll because I need to I am studying social media. Like I want to understand what's working. Like why did that video get 10,000 likes? Outside of the content itself, is it the format? You know, so I do like study the content while I'm consuming it, but I think the best thing that I've ever done is just swap out this dopamine for other things that are more positive and more aligned with the lifestyle I've created for myself.
So let me paint the picture for you of like, okay, it's 6 o'clock. You usually go to bed, let's say 9:30. You're laying on the couch, you're scrolling Instagram or TikTok, and you really want that dopamine hit, but you don't have the energy to go for a run, or maybe you don't have any healthy food in the fridge. Like, what do you do in those moments? Or what would you do?
And my mind is like racing, like I need something.
Yeah.
I would either meditate, because I can just simply do it exactly where I'm at. I don't need to change my environment. I can just do it wherever I am. Or I would just make a conscious decision that I need to stop scrolling on my phone like this and put something on TV that I want to watch. Like I am big on like guilt-free entertainment. It's just like when you choose to do it and how long you choose to do it is kind of where we should debate it. So like, at least 1-2 nights of the weekday by 7:30, I'll throw myself on that couch and watch stuff until 9:30 and then go to sleep. So it's like, wow, 2 hours of binging like content. Couldn't you be more productive and do it? No, I don't need to, because I just worked like extreme focus for 8 hours that day. I don't need to work anymore. So I'm going to give myself this little reward for a busy day. So if it's end of the day, I would say meditation is probably the better dopamine. That would probably be the one I would lean on the most.
I think another good one I've heard besides distracting yourself is, I don't know who said it, but I have heard it recently, which is like you do a countdown from like 5, and on like 0, you basically say like, I'm not doing that decision, right? Or I'm not going to do that thing. I think the swapping kind of reminds me of distracting, right? I kind of see those in the same category. I think the distracting one works for me, where it's like, oh, I really want to order, I don't know, crumble cookie or something, right? Where you know it's not good for you. It's going to, fuck up your taste buds and all that shit.
Yeah.
But then it's like, okay, let me just pivot to like, let's go down the YouTube rabbit hole. And then next thing you know, I don't care about it. Mm-hmm. The other one that I've realized too is that like, when you do give in to the thing that you want, I like how you talked about the hidden cost, because it's something I never realized, 1. And then 2 is that like the hidden costs also compound to the next day, because you've allowed yourself to do it then, and then day 2 it happens, and then day 3, and then next thing you know, it's day fucking 17, 321, and you're like, fuck, dude, how did this happen? And then that's how it happened.
Yeah, that's literally what got me to stop drinking. Was I just did the math on like, what's the actual hidden cost? It's not just me like spending money at the bar, kind of hungover the next day and slowly getting the day started. It was like, no, this is like I'm not motivated. I'm not inspired. I'm a complete degenerate Sunday because I just am a piece of shit and I'm just watching TV all day and I'm hungover and ordering bad food. So it's like, when you do the hidden cost, not just on the singular action, but if you have some fun with it and you're like, well, how does this affect me over a week, over a month, over a year? It's like, whoa, this is like pretty significant. So I do like what you said earlier. And I think I do this without even realizing it. Is like, I could be stuck in a mindless scroll and I'm like, whoa, this is deep. And I just will drop it and then like move on to something else. So if you need to count to 5, or if you need to swap the dopamine, do that. But I think I'm always thinking about like, wait, how is this long-term actually benefiting me? It's probably not. Let's probably move on from it.
So the next kind of area I'm curious on is, you've been a creator for 8 years, you've said, from podcasting to doing the coaching you do now. And I say this because I found a tweet you put out that said, I just want to be remembered as someone who did it the right way, somebody that stayed in his lane, kept his blinders on, put in the work, was a good person, did his absolute best, and left the world a better place. So do you think you've kept your promise to yourself?
Do you know the year on that tweet?
2019.
Wow. Read it one more time.
I just want to be remembered as someone who did it the right way, stayed in his lane, kept his blinders on, put in the work, was a good person, and did his absolute best, and left the world a better place. Do you think you've kept your promise with yourself?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's moments when I've peeked outside the blinders and got distracted what other people were doing, or I've had those hiccup moments along the way, but like I feel I've done a very good job of focusing within myself, staying consistent, not getting distracted, and truly helping people. Like, I'll read it to you while we're on this. I had someone DM me the other day out of the blue from 2019, funny enough. And he said, "You were my Uber driver in LA once back in 2019. We talked about logic and how you knew some of the guys on his team, which was awesome. And I followed you because of the podcast. I was going through my list of people I'm following and taking out unnecessary ones and going through your page. It is so badass to see where you are now. Sorry for the random message. I just love seeing when success and hard work pay off so visibly. 5-year plan execution at its best." I just thought it was so cool because it was someone that has been following me, and like I hope that I've impacted him in some capacity. And you know, the byproduct of me creating this content and trying to better myself, I can then hopefully pass that on and help others do the same. And to me, it's always been a win-win-win, especially when it comes to podcasts. Is like I get to connect with the guest or the host. I get to share the host and me get to have a good conversation. And then thirdly, the person that's listening gets to actually hear it. But I think I followed through on that tweet, and I appreciate you calling that one out.
I say that too because like when I was doing the research, I was like, all the things that you were saying, like you were keeping true, right? And even the podcast, right? Why did you start the podcast? Because you were curious about people that are passionate, and like, why are they passionate? What are they passionate about? Now look at what you're doing. You're passionate about literally creating the best life for yourself, so you can basically help other people do the same thing. And why is that so true? Because you had to fucking grind doing 2 basically jobs, right? To grow it. And you're like, okay, I've become the master of what it takes to give up all these different things and what that reward looks like. So you've been essentially, showing people like, are there people that want to give up alcohol? No. But if you do it, these are the outcomes. Do you want to drink maybe once a week, or you have your, 8 or 9 friends over for your, dinner, and you have a glass of wine? That's probably totally fine, right? But waking up every Sunday and you're like ordering food on Uber Eats or DoorDash and laying on the couch going on the phone, like if you've basically showed us like if your decisions and your choices and actions 4 or 5 years ago, like what you were putting out into that space is kind of like who you've become. And I've just loved kind of seeing that journey.
Dude, I appreciate that. It's I'm very grateful just to hear that reflection from you. And it's such a reminder to me. Like, it's not about where I'm trying to go. It's about where I'm at or where I've been. And if I'm still following true to what I was saying 5 years ago, like, once again, authenticity is such a big word for me. Like that's really what I've tried to do. And a lot of that comes from Gary Vee. But I appreciate that reflection. It means a lot.
Well, we're going to get into our signature question, which is the question I'm going to ask every guest.
Can't wait.
And that's a topic I've truly battled in my head often, which is, how do you define happiness? How do you define your life's purpose? So I'm going to ask you to define both of those in your own words. And then the third part will be, how did you know that what you're doing right now, that work, is so fulfilling for you?
Okay, so let's break down. First one is how do I define happiness?
Yep.
I define happiness by being in flow of something and not having any awareness to time. So in this conversation, I'm completely unaware of time because I'm enjoying the conversation. Just like the workout, I'm unaware to what time it is because I'm just like doing what I need to do. Or if I'm having dinner with my fiance, like time is like, yes, I am paying attention in case I need to be somewhere, but like time doesn't matter. It just flows, right? So I think that's a huge indicator for me, is like, does it feel like flow? If yes, probably more of it. And I think that just shows you authentically how much I value experiences in life itself rather than anything that's material. because that's really where I find the most joy and happiness. Hit me with the second question.
How would you define your life's purpose?
It changes depending on the year and depending on the month. I'll say my life purpose right now is kind of similar to what you were kind of hinting at, which is I want to help entrepreneurs or anyone that follows me optimize their life to align with their goals, personal and professional. I want to help them create a life where they love what they do from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep, and everything is in alignment, from their professional careers to their health and wellness, to their relationships, to their life experiences, to their hobbies. I want to help people create a well-rounded life, because I used to live the opposite and was burnt out and just grinding, to now living a full 360 life. And it is so fulfilling. And I want to help others do the same.
I love that. Those are great. I love the happiness one, because I've never heard anybody say like the flow, and especially the awareness of time being gone. Those are two great kind of characteristics. So I really love that one.
I haven't been asked the definition of happiness in a long time. And I've never said it in that way. And it came from a true place.
I love that. And so how have you realized that like this work that you're doing is like so fulfilling to you? Is there something that you feel? And like, how would you describe that?
Yeah. I think at a high level, people create businesses and products because they're trying to solve a problem they're either currently facing or that they've been through before. The same way I started Purpose in the Youth podcast, I started it because there was no one else out there that I had found talking to young, passionate people about how they got to where they were. And I wanted to create it because I wanted to find my passion. So at least present day, the work I'm doing today, it goes back to what I was just saying, which is like, I want to help people build and create a life that excites them, because I have lived and done jobs and lived different chapters where I wasn't excited for every single thing. And of course, there are going to be days when maybe I don't want to create. Maybe I don't want to go to the gym. Maybe I don't want to go to the community event. But more often than not, I'm pretty freaking excited to do everything that's on my calendar. So I've been very fortunate to go through that journey of going from burnt out to living a fully balanced life. And now I have the honor of helping others do the same, whether it's in my one-on-one clients, the people that just follow me on social media, the people that go through my digital courses. Like, it's exciting to see and hear feedback on how I'm helping them, and just to know that I'm just one step forward, that I've been through the path before and I can guide them through it. It's really exciting, and I love the work.
I love that. Those are some great responses, man. I appreciate those.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, Bobby, that wraps up this episode today. Thank you so much for being here. Where can listeners go to find more about you?
Yeah, before I plug myself up, I do have one request. If you're listening, you made it to the very end of this conversation, then you clearly enjoyed it. You clearly enjoyed Eric, or you clearly enjoyed, I don't know, whatever I said. You clearly are still here. So shout out to you. But please take a moment to rate and review this podcast. I know he called it on the beginning of this episode. I'm sure he does in all of the other shows. But I really want you all to take that moment and do that, because it is so important. He's putting so much time, effort, and attention and energy into creating these episodes, and he's done a fantastic job today as a host. The only thing that you can do to help him is not pay him money, is literally do the thing that is free and support the show. So drop a review or reshare this podcast out. So please do that. If you want to find me, support me, probably easiest is just go to bobbyhobert.com, BOBBYHOBERT.com. Courses, newsletter, all that fun stuff is linked up, or social would just be BO, 3 Bs, 4 As, and a Y. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, you name it.
Like you heard Bobby say, I would appreciate if you share the podcast with a friend, give it a 5-star review, subscribe on the YouTube channel. It goes a long way. Also, listeners, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to DM me on any socials for all feedback. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I'm very grateful and appreciate you. Thank you, Bobby, for joining me here today.
Hey, let's go, baby.